I believe that in the immediate future, it would certainly not be possible for developing countries to reduce their CO2 emissions. But what we can reduce is the rate of growth. And we certainly can attempt to move along a trajectory in increase of emissions of all greenhouse gases, which is much lower than what has been established by the developed world. This is where I think we need an agreement that allows for the developing countries to reach a level of prosperity and therefore some attendant increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which is inevitable. But for the developed countries, as is clearly specified in the term common but differentiated responsibility, to reduce their emissions in the immediate future. So I would say that the challenge for the developing countries is to move towards a lower carbon-intensive rate of growth, but in order to remove poverty and to be able to reach a level of well-being that everybody aspires to today, emissions will increase, in my view, for some time to come.
Thank you. We'll take one last question from the floor, right front row.
Hi. It's on? Okay. Hi, Elizabeth Rosenthal from the International Herald Tribune and New York Times. I wanted to ask the panel, can you see achieving the goals or some of the landmarks set out in the IPCC report without the world's two biggest polluters or greenhouse gas emitters, China and the U.S., being involved in whatever follows the Kyoto Protocol?
Well, this is something I really can't answer as chairman of the IPCC, but in my own individual capacity and someone who's responsible for a research institute that works essentially on sustainable development, may I say that I think every country in the world has to be committed to a shared vision and a set of common goals and actions that will help us all move towards a much lower level of emissions of carbon dioxide. And one of the major findings of the Working Group 3 report is that if we want to stabilize emissions at 445 parts per million of CO2 equivalent and a little above that, we have time up to 2015 to let emissions increase. But after that, at the year 2015, they'll have to peak and start declining thereafter. So that raises the issue of burden sharing. Who's going to do how much? And I don't see a resolution to that challenge unless every country in the world gets committed on the basis of some set principles and criteria of fairness and equity, and I would say ethics, by which we can reach the goal of much lower emissions and decreasing emissions over a period of time.
Secretary General.
If I may add, because I've been hearing from many people that what about China and the United States in this negotiation programs and negotiation process? I think that is quite a natural questions from all of us. I think basically I have high expectations of all countries, especially those that are in position to lead in this very important process. More action on climate change is necessary by all. As I stated on many occasions, this is a common endeavor, which regardless of where one is coming from, either developing or developed countries, but on the principles of common but differentiated approaches. Now, I welcome the recent U.S. Initiative on climate change and the commitment of President Bush to feed any progress which they will take in individual national level initiatives to feed into UNFCCC. He made it quite clear to me that all initiatives and measures should be incorporated into United Nations. That is very encouraging. I also welcome China's national action plan to limit emissions. This is again encouraging. I would urge Chinese and Indian government leaders to continue to do their national measures. I look forward to seeing the United States and China playing a more constructive role in the coming negotiations on future international cooperation on climate change, starting from the Bali conference. Both countries, I think, can and should lead each in its own way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Stein.
Yes, on a slightly less political point, but to all people who, in a sense, on the internet, on the news channels tonight will be listening, I think this is also a citizen's guide to engaging with climate change, because this report is meant for policymakers, but what it actually gives us, it is the key issues that we need to take up in our communities, in our sports clubs, in our football clubs, because unless people care about what is written in here, political leaders cannot move. And it is only citizens, I think, as you also said earlier on, Secretary General, who ultimately will bring the political will to bear upon negotiations. So, yes, this is a complex document, but ask your science teacher, look for people who can interpret some of this in the world that we live in, because without people caring about what this IPCC has given us, there will not be the level of political action. It depends ultimately on citizens who elect their governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm told the authors of the reports will be available down the hall if you have further questions to them. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my fellow conference officer, Susan Hansen, and myself, I'd like to wish you farewell and have a good journey home. Thank you.